From March 4th to the 17th, 11 pilgrims from various regions of Pax Christi USA traveled to Japan to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki to bring a message of reconciliation for the US bombings of those cities to the Hibakusha, who are the atomic bomb survivors, and other Japanese peace activists, as well as to join with them in a commitment to work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Despite that focus, it was quickly decided that our trip would also include a stop at the historic city of Kyoto. This presentation does focus on the nuclear issue. A very popular destination for both tourists and residents in Kyoto is the Kiyomizu-dera Temple. Consequently, it is also a very popular location for regular actions by Kyoto's peacemakers. There, at the bottom of the steps leaving the temple grounds, we met some of the peace activists collecting signatures for the abolition of nuclear weapons and distributing information on the same topic. As it turns out, they were the group of people with whom we were about to meet. For a short while, we stood with them and helped collect signatures and hand out the flyers that they had. We then proceeded together to a room on the periphery of the temple where we met even more of Kyoto's peacemakers. The program for our meeting, organized by our wonderful guide Narumi Tomita, was titled Walk Together with Solidarity, Seeking Peace and a World Without Any Nukes or War Based on True Reconciliation. Narumi opened the meeting. A minister of the temple read a warm welcome from the president of the Kyoto Religious Council. I followed with an introduction to Pax Christi, concluding with sincere thanks for this opportunity to dialogue with these compatriots for peace. We then heard from several speakers, including Ms. Rumi Hanagaki, who's on the left. She shared her poignant story. At the age of 5, she was exposed to the atomic bomb 1.7 kilometers from the hypocenter in Hiroshima. She lost her memory due to the sheer awfulness of the sights she witnessed during the evacuation. She told us about them in brutal detail, but then told us how 58 years later, when she was writing a report on the August 6th memorial ceremony, her lost memories started to return. In time, she became a storyteller for the Kyoto Atomic and Hydrogen Bomb Survivors Association, with the hope that the tragic history of the bombing would not be repeated. One of the most poignant things she shared in her presentation was this. She asked her mother, "Do you hate America for dropping the atomic bombs?" Her mother replied, "I don't hate America or Americans, but I hate wars." The next speaker was Masahiro Mikami, an internal Hibakusha, meaning he was still in his mother's womb when the bomb was dropped. He too is a storyteller of the atomic bomb experience. He pointed out many facts about the status of nuclear weapons across the globe today and emphasized that he speaks to young people to make them aware and in hope that they will spread the message that nuclear weapons must be abolished. He concluded with 3 questions for us all to contemplate. Does the use of nuclear weapons lead to peace? Do nuclear weapons make a people feel safe? Are nuclear weapons necessary? Actually, I think I changed that too quickly. Yoshiko Tezuka, a member of the Retired Teachers Union, told of a project of the Women's Teachers Union in Kyoto that started in 1968 to help victims of nuclear weapons. Members began making lap blankets, which they then sold to raise funds to provide relief for Hibakusha. In time, this became known as the 6.9 Action in recognition of August 6th and 9th, the dates of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The blankets themselves memorialize those dates, being made of 6 by 9 squares. My fellow pilgrims also spoke of our own experience and commitment to peace. Anne Swellentrop spoke about coming from Kansas City, known as the Heart of America, and she's going to be speaking later, so I am not going to speak for her. Michelle Peppers, a longtime member of Ribbon International, presented an informative explanation of the Ribbon Project. The ribbons, actually panels of cloth, each showing people's desire for nuclear disarmament, care of the environment, or peace, are created by individuals of all groups from children to adults using a variety of materials. The original theme of the ribbon was "What I Cannot Bear to Think of as Lost Forever in a Nuclear War." Ribbons have been displayed in the US, Japan, and many other countries. Finally, Carolyn Zablotny, yet another of us US pilgrims, was invited to summarize the day's events. Being totally humbled by the shared intensity of the Japanese speakers, their witness to and memories of the horrors of August 1945, their courage and faith, Carolyn addressed them saying, "You've made us all realize that reminiscence is a brave thing, that it's not about the past, but the future. We are called for the sake of our world to remember, that is, to become members one of another and to live accordingly in peace as brothers, as sisters." And then she added something that Dorothy Day, apostle of nonviolence and candidate for sainthood, wrote in the Catholic Worker newspaper after learning about President Truman's jubilation over the bombing. "Perhaps we will breathe their dust into our nostrils, feel them in the fog of New York on our faces, feel them in the rain on the hills of Easton." With that, Carolyn pledged to remember and never to forget. All the speeches completed, and before we departed together, we formed a large circle and created a beautiful ribbon of peace, celebrating our time together. After our Kyoto experience, we moved on to Hiroshima. One of the remains we saw of the atomic bombing was the Hiroshima branch of the Bank of Japan. On August 6th, the interior was destroyed by the atomic bomb and 42 people inside were killed. The concrete exterior withstood the blast, but other banks across the city did not. Consequently, only 2 days later, on August 8th, this bank was partitioned and reopened to serve the various branches of the bank throughout the city. The first stop on our first full day in Hiroshima was the World Friendship Center, a not-for-profit peace organization established in 1965. The World Friendship Center was founded by Barbara Reynolds, a prominent Quaker peace activist who devoted her life to creating awareness about the plight of the atomic bombing survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's staffed by English-speaking employees and volunteers who provide a place where people from many nations can meet, share their experiences, and reflect on peace. They tell the stories of Hiroshima, support guest peace studies with guided tours, and carry on the vision of Barbara Reynolds by advocating for the elimination of nuclear weapons. While we were there, we were not only introduced to the center and its founder, but Ray Matsumiya, director of the Oleander Initiative, presented a fine orientation to the initiative, which specializes in educational trips to Hiroshima, including our own. Two of his staff, Kanade Kurozumi and Mireille Tashiro, served as our peace education coordinators and guides for the rest of our time in Hiroshima. Professor Ron Klein, who teaches at the Hiroshima Jogakuin University, also presented a very informative lecture on facets of Hiroshima, in which he shared some of the city's history, culture, literacy, and much more. In the afternoon, Mr. Katsumi Takahashi led us on a tour of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, a most moving highlight of the pilgrimage. While Hiroshima is known as the city of peace, and most places, including this park, the Peace Museum, Peace Bridge, and Peace Boulevard, have the name Peace, the atomic bomb dome does not. It has been preserved and named so as never to forget the devastation caused by one relatively small nuclear weapon. Here's my cursor. There it is. The park is also home to the Peace Bell, which we were all encouraged to ring. The Atomic Bomb Memorial Mound contains an underground cinerarium where the ashes of tens of thousands of atomic bomb victims are laid. There is also a monument in memory of the Korean victims of the atomic bomb. Hiroshima was home to many forced Korean laborers, and it is believed that approximately 30,000 Korean nationals died when the bomb fell. The Children's Peace Monument was inspired by the life and death of Sadako Sasaki, the subject of a renowned children's book, Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. It is dedicated to all children who died from the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The inscription at the base of the statue reads, "This is our cry, this is our prayer for building peace in the world." Beneath the statue is a bell into which is carved 1,000 paper cranes and "Peace on Earth, and in the heavens. Surrounding the monument are several cases with visions of peace, completely composed of colorful paper cranes. Stretching between the atomic bomb dome and the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum is the Pond of Peace and the Flame of Peace. And before the pond and flame is the cenotaph, which holds the register of deceased A-bomb victims and which is updated periodically as more and more Hibakusha die. Engraved on the central stone chamber, it says, "Let all the souls here rest in peace, for we shall not repeat the evil." From the Peace Park, we entered the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, where there was a special exhibit, Memories of Friends. It was a tribute to those junior high school students who died from the atomic bomb by their surviving friends and classmates who still feel the loss. Overall, the museum contains exhibits that recall the devastation of August 6, 1945, the damage from radiation to people and property, the heartbreak of loved ones, the commitment to live on, and a more modern overview of the dangers of nuclear weapons and the call for their abolition. There are also artifacts from the visits of Popes John Paul II and Francis to Hiroshima, and a memorial to Barbara Reynolds of the World Friendship Center, along with a very strong letter to President Biden from the mayor of Hiroshima, urging him to remember the horrific impact of one atomic bomb on Hibakusha and to work towards nuclear weapons abolition. In addition, there is the Peace Watch Tower with a very grim message. Placed atop the tower is a round clock showing the current time. Under the clock is a digital display indicating the number of days since the A-bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Beneath that is another display showing the number of days since the last nuclear test was conducted. Installed on the bottom of the tower is a cogwheel device. It consists of 15 cogwheels lined up from top to bottom. The concept is the cogwheel at the top rotates 100 times per minute, but it will spin faster if the Earth shows signs of being in danger. If it reaches the immovable cogwheel at the bottom, the clock will automatically self-destruct. The ultimate point, in order to stop the cogwheel from spinning, we must work toward abolishing all nuclear weapons and seek for an age of coexistence among humankind without dependence on military force. You can see that when we were there, it was 904 days from the previous nuclear bomb testing. But on May 14th, 2024, the US conducted a new nuclear test. On May 19th, the museum reset the clock to 5. Today, September 21st, it will read 130, assuming no new nuclear tests have taken place since May 14th. The next morning, we were off to Nagarikawa Church, a Methodist church which was almost completely destroyed by the atomic bomb on August 6th. A year later, the pastor, Reverend Kiyoshi Tanimoto, held the annual foundation service to respond to the desire of the parishioners to gather, to pray, and to commit to rebuilding the church. They made what has become known as the atomic bomb crucifix from part of the surviving wooden structure of the chapel. It now hangs at the front of the chapel. Hosting us at the church was Reverend Tanimoto's daughter, Koko Kondo, who was just 8 months old when the atomic bomb struck. Nestled in her mother's arms, she was the only surviving child in their neighborhood. As she grew older, she learned of the horrific impact of the atomic bomb and was filled with anger and a desire for revenge against those who did this terrible deed. She said she wanted to meet and punch him, whoever that would be. At the age of 10, her father's work for peace and his Hiroshima Maidens Project to provide corrective plastic surgery for Japanese girls disfigured by the bombing led him, along with the whole family, to the TV show, This Is Your Life. Unbeknownst to them, the co-pilot of the Enola Gay, Captain Robert Lewis, was also a guest on the show. Here was Coco's chance to get her revenge, but something remarkable happened. Captain Lewis spoke of circling back over the city after dropping the bomb and seeing its impact. He was horrified. gasped, "My God, what have we done?" He'd been living with that horror for 10 years and never fully recovered. Coco was surprised and moved by his deep, sincere pain and remorse. She reached out and, instead of punching him, held his hand. She realized at that moment that the real enemy was war. This was more in the spirit of her father, whose work for peace also got the attention of John Hersey, author of the seminal work Hiroshima in 1946. Coco showed us notes of her father to John Hersey about that terrible time. Fighting back tears, she then told us how, as a young survivor of the bomb, she was subjected to years of tests and examinations to study the effects of radiation exposure, examination she found more and more upsetting and humiliating as she grew into adolescence. But on a happier note, she also told us how she befriended Nobel Prize-winning author Pearl S. Buck, and how that relationship greatly influenced her personal work with Japanese orphans. She, who couldn't have children of her own because of being exposed to the atomic bomb, adopted 2 children and helped place 19 others with parents overseas. That afternoon, we proceeded to Nagatsuka Jesuit Monastery, the Jesuit novitiate at the time of the atomic bombing. Although it is 30 minutes from the hypocenter of the atomic blast, it sustained notable damage, including shattered windows and a collapsed roof. The priests living there also sustained injuries, but were able to welcome and treat many wounded who managed to reach them. Father Pedro Arrupe was rector, but had background as a university medical student. He and fellow priests and sisters who came to help turned the chapel into a makeshift clinic with wall-to-wall patients, using whatever materials they had on hand, and then improvising with sheets, shirts, and even underwear, as well as diluted boric acid. They managed to save 100 lives. Next, we visited Noboricho Catholic Church, the church affiliated with Nagatsuka Novitiate and Monastery. Noboricho Church was much closer to the hypocenter and was totally destroyed by the atomic bombing. 4 priests and their lay colleagues were injured to varying degrees, but all banded together to do whatever they could to care for each other and many wounded around them. Within the first 24 hours, they gathered those they could and carried them, often stumbling over dead bodies in the dark and through the black rain, to Shukein Garden, along one of Hiroshima's 7 rivers. One person whose service came as a welcome surprise was Reverend Tanimoto, Coco Kondo's father, who managed to use a small boat to transport some of the wounded, 1 person at a time, across the river to the garden. Ultimately, the 4 priests found their way to Nagatsuka in the middle of the night. In time, under the leadership of Father Hugo LaSalle, who had been pastor of Noboricho Church, the church was rebuilt as the Memorial Cathedral for World Peace and dedicated on August 6th. We were honored to be able to celebrate Mass with Hiroshima's Bishop Shirahama at the cathedral. It was a peace Mass for forgiveness and reconciliation. Projected on a large screen was Bishop Shirahama's homily in English, which included these profound words: "The enemy that man must fight is not the people of other nations, but the sin of our hearts and the carelessness of our minds." Behind the main altar is a magnificent mosaic, the second coming of Christ. It was chosen to offer hope for the future to the people of Hiroshima who had the unprecedented experience of seeming to see the end of the world, and also to offer meaning to all who pray for world peace. After the Mass, we had what also seemed unprecedented. The main altar of the cathedral was set up with chairs for all 11 of us Pax Christi pilgrims and for representatives of 6 Hibakusha organizations of Hiroshima, along with translators, and in front of us was a large row of journalists ready to listen and to field questions. First, Bob Cushing explained the purpose of our pilgrimage. I read our letter of apology for the atomic bombing of Hiroshima by our U.S. government. Mr. Minomaki, co-president of the Hiroshima Prefectural Council of Atomic Bomb Survivor Organizations, gave a reply graciously accepting our apology. Mr. Tanaka, executive director of the Hiroshima Liaison Conference of A-Bomb Survivor Organizations, then read our joint declaration for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Mr. Sakuma, co-president with Mr. Minomaki, gave a closing address. The press conference followed, and the very next day, we found ourselves in at least 2 Japanese newspapers, complete with quotes and photos, and on Japanese TV news. After this remarkable morning and lunch, we continued to the Shukeien Japanese garden, the garden where so many, including the priests from Noburicho Church, fled after the atomic bomb fell. It borders the river that Reverend Tanimoto crossed repeatedly to bring some of the atomic bomb casualties away from the fires of hell that were turning Hiroshima into a wasteland. On our last full day in Hiroshima, we had the privilege of visiting the Hankawa Elementary School, which was the closest school to the epicenter of the nuclear blast. Although over 400 students and 10 teachers died, the school reopened a little more than 6 months later for 45 students. In the school museum are before and after photos that show the distance between the hypocenter and the atomic blast and the school just across the river. They also show how built up the area was before and how leveled it was after. Another photo shows children playing outside the school when it reopened, with the atomic bomb dome in the not too distant background. My own photo shows the same view today. Whoops, sorry. The reinforced concrete walls in the basement were the only things that managed to survive the blast. The interior of the building was lost. It is the original facade of the school and the basement that have been transformed into the museum. At the entrance is a stone engraved with the message, A-bomb monument, may our prayer for peace reach far and wide. It sits on another stone, an A-bomb stone that was found on the school grounds. Just inside are thousands of origami peace cranes gifted to the museum from many different places far and wide. Also on exhibit is a collage of children's artwork from shortly after the school reopened. The museum also features artifacts left from the atomic bomb blast, including part of an atomic bombed tree. Perhaps the highlight of the museum is a complete scale model of the city of Hiroshima following the atomic blast. And I will just use my cursor. There's the atomic dome, and there's the school right across the way from it. Our final destination was Nagasaki. Our first stop there was the Hypocenter Park, ground zero of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. This park contains a memorial monolith built in 1968 with the engraving message enshrining the names of those who died in the atomic bombing. Right next to the monolith is a remnant of the original Origami Cathedral, destroyed by the atomic blast on August 9th. There is also a case displaying the original ground level, now well below the current ground level due to all the debris piled layer upon layer when buildings fell and earth melted. Stone lanterns from a nearby Buddhist temple, all that was left of the temple, are found in the park as well. And there is a very moving 50th anniversary memorial statue depicting a woman holding her dead child and wearing a skirt of fire. The date and time of the nuclear attack are on the base of the statue. As we left the park and moved on to the nearby rebuilt Origami Church, we passed statues from the original church, the tumbled belfry, and photos and descriptions of the devastation. We next visited the Nagasaki Peace Park that contains the iconic peace statue, a huge bronze statue of a seated man whose right arm points toward the sky to symbolize the nuclear threat, and whose left arm is pointing horizontally to express the desire for peace. Other monuments throughout the park extend the cry to remember and to commit to peace. The day ended at the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. Built in remembrance of and out of respect for the victims and survivors of the atomic bomb, the museum covers the history of this event from the early development of nuclear weapons through the process that led to the atomic bomb being dropped to the devastation that followed. The very first exhibit showed The very first exhibit shows a mangled water tower that was once at Keiho Junior High School, just 800 meters from the bomb's hypocenter. Other very disturbing artifacts include burnt clothes, broken toys, and a watch stopped at the exact moment when the bomb dropped, all belongings of those who died in the attack. Accompanying them are heart-wrenching accounts from the bomb survivors, photos, and drawings of the horrors they experienced. Also on exhibit is a model of the bomb that leveled Nagasaki, a chart of the science behind it, and a map of where nuclear weapons are stockpiled today. On a more hopeful note is a chronology of post-war efforts towards nuclear disarmament and the story of Nagasaki's recovery since 1945. The ultimate aim of the museum is to contribute to the complete abolition of these weapons of mass destruction and to achieve world peace. The ultimate message of this presentation and of our pilgrimage is the same. No more Hibakushas, no more Hiroshimas, no more Nagasakis, no more nuclear weapons.